Hey there, and welcome to my first video. Today I want to be making a big stone lithograph because I won't have access to a stone this big for quite a while. So, once I find a stone that's the right size for me, I'm planning on doing a full sheet of paper. I'm just bring over this hydraulic lift and transfer it up to the graining sink. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with stone lithography, graining is the process in which we take the stone and we sand down the top surface of the stone. We do this for a few reasons. One, we can get rid of the old and existing image. Two, we want to level the stone, and so we want it to be completely flat so that there are no pressure issues. And three, we want it to have a desired kind of smoothness or roughness to it. So before I begin graining the stone, I'm going to have to check and see if it is nice and flat. So that's what I'm doing right here. I have this nice straight edge, which is completely flat across the bottom of this kind of ruler looking thing, and I have a slip of paper, and I'm trying to slide this piece of paper underneath the straight edge, and if it gets caught, that means it's a high spot, and if it slides too freely underneath, then that means it's a low spot. And so an ideal stone, you just be able to stick the slip of paper underneath there and it wouldn't move around because it would be, perfectly flat across that straight edge. And so I'm going to mark all the high spots with a pencil, and I'm going to give those spots a little bit of extra attention when I begin graining them. So when you grain a stone, you use water, which acts as a lubricant, and it helps carry away all the loose limestone that you kind of make when you grain it. We also use carborundum grit. That's the gray stuff that you see me using, and it's basically a nice sifted, hard grain that we can use to sand this down, and we use a levigator, which is the heavy thing that you see me spinning. And so one of the advantages that this has over a traditional, power sander or orbital sander is that the grain and the levigator and the stone are all kind of independent of each other, and that allows the carborundum grit to just loosely and freely move wherever it wants to go. And this helps create a really randomized texture, kind of halftone pattern to the stone. If you ever used a random orbital sander, you might notice that if you move too fast or too slow, or not in the right way, you get those really annoying pigtail swirls. And so graining is kind of like that. It avoids that problem, although you can still kind of get a random mistake in case a random chunk of limestone kind of pops off. It'll leave what's called a graining mark, and it'll leave a big negative space of a white line arc through your image. So I'm speeding through this quite a bit, and I'm going to cut a lot out of editing because you don't want to watch me grain forever. This whole process kind of took me about an hour and a half, and so it took quite a while. And so what I'm basically going to do is do 2 passes of 80 grit, 120 grit, 180 grit, 220 grit, F, which is about 280, and the triple F, which is about 400. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of the audio and me graining in real-time speed so you can kind of see what it's like. So once I'm done with this pass, I'm going to move on to my other grits, and once I've done 2 more passes of all of those, then I'm done graining my stone. And so this will leave a nice smooth surface for me to draw on. And so once the stone's dry, I can move it back to my office and start drawing. And so first, I want to tape down some registration pins. These pins are going to serve as a reference point for me to lock my paper to every single time. And so if I have these pins, and my sketch was registered to the pins, the print's registered to the pins, and the paper is registered to the pins, then in theory, everything will line up in the exact same spot every single time. So once that's set up, I want to take this red iron oxide paper, put it underneath my sketch, and so when I draw on top of my sketch, it will transfer the red iron oxide onto the stone. And so this red iron oxide will not interfere with the etching or printing process, but it will give me enough of a reference point to base my drawing off of. So now I can finally begin drawing on the stone. And so I guess now is as good of a time as ever to explain how stone lithography works. And to boil it down simply, stone lithography and lithography in general work on the principle that oil and water do not mix. And so if I have my stone and I draw on it with a grease pencil, which is what I'm doing right here, I can wet the stone and the non-drawn parts of the stone will hold water and the grease drawing will repel water. And so by rolling an inky roller over the top of the surface, I can slowly build up a thin film of oily, greasy ink. And then with that, I can transfer that over to a piece of paper using the printing press. And so while I'm drawing this, you might notice that I have a slip of paper underneath my hand. That is so the grease from my hands and the oils from my palms do not impart themselves onto the stone, because those would also start to attract the ink when I roll over them. The footage that you're seeing right now is sped up to about 30 times the original speed, because I have a lot of footage to go through. I think on this drawing alone, it took me about 2 weeks, starting from November 7th all the way to the 21st. And I have probably around like 60 hours of footage rolling here. So I've just got it condensed to some of my favorite parts. So I'm not quite sure what to put into all of this time where I'm drawing, so I'm just going to ramble for a little bit. I guess if I had to give myself a piece of advice when I was starting out lithography, so advice to all of you beginning lithographers out there, I would probably tell myself to always keep your pencil sharp and to draw with the side of your pencil rather than straight down. I have a pretty bad habit of drawing or writing straight down, and I usually put a lot of pressure when I write. I break a lot of mechanical pencils if it's 0.5 millimeter lead. And so I think once I figured out that I should be drawing with the side of my pencil and to keep the tip sharp, I was able to start getting a lot softer tones, making it look a lot less kind of harsh. When you draw with the side of your pencil and just starting from really light and slowly building up those darks. As you see right here, I kind of started with a light gray tone over the entire jacket, and then now I'm starting to put back all of those dark tones into it. You can really get a lot softer and richer kind of tones to it. Because I think if you kind of have a heavy hand to it, it ends up kind of being more line work. When I first started working on this print, it was about that time when AI art started emerging and becoming all of the rage, you know, and a lot of people had different opinions on it, and they got me thinking, you know, AI art, the kind of the definition of ownership, the definitions of style, and more importantly for me, what is the definition of inspiration. And so, you know, I look back at all of the older artists that came before me, all the old printmakers. You might feel some MC Escher kind of vibes in the architecture of this building, you know, stuff like that. You know, the nature of inspiration and where we draw, you know, those ideas from. And so that just kind of got me thinking about it personally. And so in this piece, you'll kind of see several different interpretations of me. One that's kind of me in my outside wear that I'm drawing right now, you know, my outside coat, all the several layers on, and this version of me is referring to my more peeled back version of myself with just one coat on, my thinner layers, and kind of how I feel like I want to be perceived. And that version of myself refers to a more anatomical, skeletal version of me, referring back to what I really am, who I am. Is that escapable? Is that changeable? And that version of me is referring back to sort of a reflection of an astronaut with his hands held in a prayer position. You know, I really like this image of the astronaut praying. If you've ever read Tatsuki Fujimoto's Chainsaw Man, you might have noticed it's a very iconic scene. I'm not going to spoil it, but it appears later, and I really fell in love with that imagery, kind of the idea of the pinnacle of science. You know, we always refer to rocket science as, you know, one of the most complex things you could know, and having his hands kind of clasped in this kind of prayer, religious symbol. It's kind of merging the pinnacle of science and the pinnacle of faith, just kind of using this as a symbol of, you know, peak, I guess, self-improvement. And strewn amongst the background, there will be several buildings. Lots of them are local architectures. You might notice that the windows underneath at the bottom of this piece will reference kind of the set of windows in the print shop that I work at. And, you know, the overhead kind of walkway overhangs the theater building over here. The tree branch that you first saw me draw is just a walnut tree branch that kind of, it's along the walk from the school to my house. And then the far buildings in the background reference some buildings that I saw back in Ohio when I was at the Mid-America Print Council conference. And so I feel like these themes kind of play a lot in my work, the themes of inspiration, because I reference a lot of my daily life within my work. But if you're looking for my official stance on AI art, you probably won't find it here. I just thought that, you know, the whole debate and topic of AI art was a nice jumping off point for me to kind of self-reflect on, you know, the origin of inspiration and that within my own life and my own artwork. And sometimes art can just be that. This is just a sort of self-expression. It's a bit therapeutic to draw. You kind of think about things while you're drawing, working ideas out of your head, that and the sort. And so here I am finishing up this astronaut. While I was working on it, I wanted to try out rubbing crayons. So that's what you see me doing right here. I've never really tried them before, and so I got what I thought was a rubbing crayon, but I don't think it was. It was one of those square ones, and it did not like to come off of the blue towel. I did not like to rub in, and so I kind of gave up on that. Yeah, it would have been cool. And I think you'll find that, well, I did find out later that it was not a rubbing crayon. I don't know what it was. I think it was just a square brick of a crayon. But later I did find some rubbing crayons, and I did that a little bit towards the outer edges of the piece. And so that was fun. It did work. It was a fun working experience. But nothing really quite beats the pencil, at least for me. I just kind of like that soft, kind of directional flow that kind of gives this darkness here. And so, still quite a bit more footage of drawing. Not quite sure what to fill this time with. If you know me, I don't really listen to music, so I wouldn't really know what to kind of background music to put over this, so I guess I'll just ramble on for a little bit more. You know, I have a litho stone. Actually, I keep 3 of my litho stones in my room, just for a lack of a better place to put them. They're kind of right by the doorway, but there's still enough room to walk around. But last night, After I was getting ready to go to bed, turned off all my lights, I finally kind of just like stubbed my toe on that litho stone. That was probably one of the worst things that could happen, because that definitely woke me up and it was very hard to go to sleep. So I guess moral of the story, don't put your litho stones on the floor on the walkway to your bed. But I don't know, litho stones are just such a big inconvenient thing to have. I was actually at the printers fair in Mount Pleasant, Iowa this year, and some lady had a litho stone and she was offering it to me for free because she didn't want it. And man, litho stones are expensive, and I thought about taking it, but once you've owned a few, you'll notice that they take up a lot of space, and they're big and they're heavy and they're hard to move. So I turned her down. I think I have 5 stones, 4 11 by 15 ones and 1 small one to grain, and I think that's enough for me. I don't think I could ever get into the camp of collecting litho stones. So man, they take up space, and it's hard to find a storage system for them that works. Now, once my drawing is finally done, we can move on to the processing part. So unfortunately, I can't just print straight from this drawing on the stone. I have to do a little bit of processing to kind of help my drawing stay stable within the stone. And so what I'm doing is etching the stone. And so what you see me doing here is I have 3 kind of shot glasses with gum arabic in them, and I am mixing in nitric acid into it. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to brush my drawing with rosin and talc. Rosin will help protect my drawing. It'll stick to the grease drawing. The talc will help stick to the rosin, and it'll help the gum arabic kind of completely cover the stone rather than repelling my drawings. And then I'm going to put gum arabic all over the stone, and I am going to apply these different etches onto different parts of my drawing. And so the etches with less nitric acid are going to go onto my lighter, more delicate parts of my drawing, because I don't want them to completely burn out my drawing. And the parts of my drawings with the darker drawings is going to get the stronger nitric acid concentration. And so what these are going to help do is stabilize the limestone in those areas so that they can accept water and hold on to water rather than those parts of the stone getting overpowered with the grease when I roll over it with the roller. So when I'm finally done with all of my etching, I'm going to take a damp sponge, not too damp, and then remove most of the excess gum arabic. And then I'm going to take these nice soft balls of cheesecloth and then quickly buff away all of the excess gum arabic. And so what's left is just but a very thin film of gum arabic, nice and smooth, and it's going to keep the stone protected. Now, the good thing about gum arabic is that it is resistant to most solvents, like we're going to use in a lot of oils. So our mineral spirits and our lithotine, it'll keep our stone perfectly protected, but I'll still be able to access all of those grease dots from my drawing. And now I want to reinforce this drawing even more. The more times you process your stone, usually the better and more smoothly things go in printing. I can etch my stone another time just to kind of reinforce, my white areas will not pick up and scum with ink where I don't want them to do. And so you let your stone rest for about 12 to 24 hours, and then you can begin your second etch. And in order to do a second etch, we're going to first remove the grease drawing from the stone. The grease drawing itself is rather weak. If I tried to print it itself, it'd probably pull off of the stone onto my brayer. And so we're going to replace this grease drawing with ink. That way I can hit it with a little bit hotter etches, more nitric to the limestone, and in turn reinforce that limestone a little bit better. And so once the drawing is completely removed, I'm going to replace that drawing, which was sitting on top of the surface of the stone, with a very thin layer as asphaltum, which is nice and liquid and will seep a little bit below into the surface of the stone something that can't be pulled out by the roller. And then I'm going to proceed as if I was about to print this stone by washing off the gum arabic layer that is protecting the stone. And then I'm going to take this roller and then very lightly, kind of slowly build up a layer of ink until the stone looks like how I want it to print. And so once I've got it to the kind of desired value scale that I want to print at, I just dry out the stone, and then we will proceed just like we did for the first etch, except for I'm probably going to use a little bit stronger of etches. And so rosin, talc, gum arabic, and then reapply your etches. And then sponge off the excess gum, buff dry, and then wait another about 12 hours. And after that, I did a third etch, but it's pretty much the exact same thing as the second etch. It adds another layer of stability, so things go smoother in the printing process. So instead, here's some footage of me snapping a cheesecloth in slow motion. And now after all that processing, it's finally printing day. And so, just going to do a little bit of pre-press. First, I'm going to put my scraper bar in the press, get my stones centered on the press, set up my magnets. These little magnets are going to let me know when to start and stop when they meet this little engraved line on the brass. And then I'm going to set my pressure. And for me, my lithography pressure, at least on these Charles Baron presses, is I have the pressure bar lowered all the way down. I tighten this pressure knob as tight as I possibly can, and then I raise the pressure bar up and I do a little 180 churn of more pressure on the screw, and that is usually the right amount of pressure for me to print. And then one more time, removing my image to get all that old ink out so I can slowly build up a new fresh layer of ink, and then rubbing in a brand new layer of asphaltum, and then we're finally ready to print. Now I'm just going to grab a litho sponge, a bowl of water, and roll out a slab of ink. And then we go water, ink, water, ink, water, ink. One more time, water, ink, and then we give it a test print. And through trial and error, you figure out how much ink you need. Once you figure it out, so say for example about 3 or 4 passes before you get the next print, you repeat the process. So more water, more ink, more water, more ink, more water, more ink, and then you print. And then you continue this for about, I think it took me about 5 hours, and I got about 20 prints from this. And then it was time for the color. I knew I wanted color for this piece, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to go about it. At first my plan was to screen print color over it, but then I found out that I only have one piece of clear Mylar to try and do a sort of screen print transparency with these paint pens, and it kind of worked, but again I only had one sheet of Mylar. And so then I tried to do color Sharpie flats on the stone to color in the people, but I didn't pre-stretch my paper beforehand, and so that kind of proved to not work out for me. It ended up causing the paper to stretch quite a bit, and I did not have too high hopes for that. And so I finally ended up settling on doing a screen filler reduction, which is where you take a screen and you can paint on this red screen filler kind of blocking fluid, and everywhere that I paint red will block ink, and so everything that stays as a yellow open mesh I can force ink through. Think of it like a stencil, kind of like if you've ever made a stencil to spray paint something Very similar to that, just except for the screen can kind of hold on to these stencils and inks and only print when you are ready to print and force the ink through. And so I did a layer for the kind of skin tones and the yellows, and then I did a reduction for the clothes colors. So this kind of very slight gray color we've got here. And then that's it. So just going to take a quick second to pull off all of these registration strips over here. My advice for those of you who have trouble pulling tape off of paper, pull it at a low diagonal and away from the sheet of paper that you want to save. That'll prevent it from like kind of tearing and eating into your nice big sheet of paper. And it's moments like this where it really feels like all of your hard work is finally paid off. What's next is editioning this set of prints. And so I'm going to lay them all out in front of me, and then I'm going to visually inspect them for things that I might consider flaws or make them different or inconsistent from one another. So for example, this one right here has some red dots of screen filler that accidentally touched the print when it was still wet. And so I'm just going to take this print, move it out of the edition. It can go into the trash so no one will ever know that you made mistakes. And then once you've gathered all of your perfect little children, you kind of take them over and you start signing your edition. So over on the left hand corner, I'm going to write the number in the edition. So this one is 1 out of 20. The VE stands for variable edition, so some of these are on different colored paper. The next one will be 2 out of 20, and so on and so forth. In the middle, I'm going to write the title. So I'm titling this piece, The Lover, The Lost, and The Living. And I always try to find a way to throw an ampersand into my titles because that's my favorite character. And then over on the right side, I'm just going to do a little signature and the last 2 digits of the year. And so since this one's 2022, I'm going to write a little 22 behind at the end. So thank you for watching. If you stayed through the whole thing, I hope you really enjoyed it and my commentary and seeing how I work. It was a lot of work to condense this 200-hour project all the way down to a 30-minute video. But I hope you enjoyed my thoughts, and I really enjoy making art, and so hopefully I'll have more projects in the future. I hope this piece is kind of a testament to the beauty of stone lithography, this nice graininess that you kind of see, this texture, the softness of the stone. I feel like it is unmatched. It is one of my favorite surfaces to draw on. I don't know, there's something about it that's just so much more fun than just drawing on paper. But that's just me. So let me know what you think, if you want anything else from me. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Have a nice day.